Howdy everyone and welcome back. So I was just sitting on the porch enjoying the morning and looking around at what kind of projects I could do today. And that's when I realized that I still have tomato plants to plant. And I thought, why not bring you along and show you some of the tips and tricks I've learned along the way on how to grow big and healthy tomato plants. So come along with me and let's go check it out. So one of the first things you want to ask yourself is, what varieties of tomatoes grow best in your area? Here in North Texas, I normally like to grow and recommend for others to grow the smaller varieties of tomatoes like porters, Roma tomatoes, cherry tomatoes, because here in North Texas it gets really hot and dry. And that kind of climate just doesn't work well for those big giant tomatoes because they require a lot of water and something about the heat just never really sets well with them. But you may live in a climate where those kinds of tomatoes grow really well. The way you want to check that is you can do some research online for your zone and where you live, and you can also check with your local extension agent that deals with produce and vegetable production, and they'll be able to tell you what varieties of tomatoes do best for the area that you live in. So once you've found what varieties work well in your area and which ones you want to grow in your garden, the next thing you're going to want to find out is, are those varieties determinate varieties or indeterminate varieties? A determinate variety is what they call a bush style tomato. It's going to make more of a compact plant and stay around the 4 foot tall range. Where an indeterminate variety is what they call a vine style tomato. And the vines on those can get 10 foot long, sometimes more or less. And not only do these grow a little bit differently, but you can also expect them to produce tomatoes differently as well. And you can also expect them to need a little bit different care. So one of the main differences between determinate and indeterminate varieties is how they grow and how they produce fruit. On a determinate variety, once the terminal bud set, the buds closest to the top of the plant, begin to produce fruit, that's when the plant's going to stop growing, and they usually produce their fruit within a 2 to 3 week period. And once that period is over, like I said, it stops growing and it will eventually die soon after. And these are the varieties of tomatoes that are the best for container plants because they will stay a lot more compact than the indeterminate varieties. And with an indeterminate variety though, it will produce until a freeze kills it pretty much. And so it's going to produce fruit over a longer period of time than a determinate variety will. So one of the other main differences between a determinate and indeterminate variety comes down to whether or not you want to prune the suckers. And what suckers are these little stems that grow up between the main stem and these offshoot leaves. Here's another little small one here. And by doing that, in some varieties, you're taking energy away from producing more stems, and you're going to concentrate it more into producing fruit. But in determinate varieties, you do not want to prune the suckers, because all you're really doing by doing that is you're just reducing the amount of fruit you're going to get. Because determinate varieties really just produce fruit within a shorter period of time, and it's really not going to have much impact on the size or quantity of fruit you're going to get. In indeterminate varieties though, they produce fruit over a much longer period, so you're going to produce a lot more fruit in the long run. But by pruning these, potentially you may be reducing the amount of fruit you get, but all the fruit you're going to grow is going to have a lot more energy put into it, so they're going to be bigger and healthier fruits. Okay, so let's talk about tomato plant nutrition. Before I get into any of these, you always want to do a soil test of your raised beds and gardens before you start adding any nutrients. Unless you do a test, you really don't know what nutrients you need to add or not to add. And the way you can do this is you can take a soil test by taking some soil from your garden or your raised bed, and you can submit it to a lab like Noble Foundation or Texas A&M Soil Lab, and they will give you a readout of the amount of nutrients your soil has. So one of the things you really want to watch out for when working with your tomatoes is giving it too much nitrogen. What's going to happen if you do is it's going to grow all this big pretty green growth, lots of stems, and it's going to look so healthy, but not many tomatoes. By giving it a lot of nitrogen, all it's really going to do is put its energy into green growth, and it's really not going to help you grow any more tomatoes out of doing that. But not to say nitrogen isn't important, you just don't want to overdo it. One of the major problems that can show up with tomatoes from time to time is what's called blossom end rot. And what that is the end of the tomato is going to turn brown, mushy, and it's just going to rot and you're not going to want to eat it. And what blossom end rot is due to is the lack of calcium uptake into the plant. And this could be due for multiple reasons. There may not be enough calcium in your soil, or it could be your pH is not the right level to where it can't absorb this calcium from the soil. But one way I help to fight this and make sure there is enough calcium there is I like to save up my eggshells from these guys, and I clean them off and save them up, and what I do is I crush them down into the finest powder I can. And when I plant my tomatoes, I put a good healthy handful around the base of the roots, and that's going to allow to have enough calcium there once it breaks down, that all I have to make sure is my pH is the right level for the plant to be able to take it up. One of the main nutrients I want to make sure my tomato plants have enough of is phosphorus. Phosphorus is very important in root development and flower production and flowering plants in general, but in this case our tomatoes. By having enough phosphorus, that's going to make sure we have a good healthy root system to where it can take up enough water and nutrients to where we have a good healthy plant. And having enough phosphorus is what's going to make sure we have good flower production, which is just going to lead to more tomatoes in the end. And the way I like to do this and make sure my tomatoes have enough phosphorus is by adding a little bit of bone meal when I plant my tomatoes, and I'll add it maybe one more time during the growing season. And all bone meal is ground up bones from the meat packing industry, which is a byproduct in the end. So one of my favorite techniques when it comes to tomatoes is what I call stem planting. And what that is we're going to take this tomato, and as the name kind of suggests, we're going to plant it all the way up its stem. Because tomatoes have the awesome capability of being able to easily root out from their stems. And we're going to take advantage of that because that's going to help a lot with water uptake, nutrient uptake, and it's going to help a lot with stability. Because if I were to go plant this tall spindly guy like it is, the wind could easily break the stem and kill the plant, and we're definitely not getting tomatoes at that point. So let's go check that out. I'll show you how to do that and tell you a little bit more about it as we go along. So there's two ways of doing this technique. You can either plant the tomato really deep straight down like this, and you'll want to bury it up to the bottom of the first leaf a little bit below. Or since my bed's a little shallow, I'm going to do the second technique. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bury the base of the tomato just like as you would plant it, but I'm going to do this sideways, and we're going to let the stem, we're going to bury the stem sideways. And what's going to happen is as the stem lays down, the tomato is going to go against the center of gravity and it's going to prop itself back up. So all this right here will become roots, and then the tomato is going to stand itself up, and the base where we put the soil at is going to be the bottom of the stalk. And then you can just treat it as a normal tomato as you would. So let's do that, and then I'll show you what it looks like. So now that we've covered the whole stem, all of that's going to become roots, and that's just going to help the plant take up water and nutrients like I mentioned before. And don't worry about the plant laying down like it is now, because what's going to happen is it's going to actually stand itself up from the center of gravity, and this right here will become the base of the plant, and come in a day or two and this will be standing straight up just like a normal tomato plant. And if anyone looked at it, they would never know this was all stem, and the base of it's actually right here in the middle of the bed. Okay, so once you've got your tomato planted and the stems have stood back up, the next thing you're going to want to think about is giving it a little bit of support. because as this thing grows, the stems are going to need some support from making sure the wind doesn't break it. If any animals come along or people, you want to give it a little bit of protection for, you don't want them knocking it over, you don't want them breaking the stems. And the best way I found to do that still is just the good old store-bought tomato cage, or you can build your own. Just any way of giving it a little bit of support as it grows up. It's going to help keep this confined a little bit as well, to where it keeps it a little bit easier to manage so it's not sprawling out all over the bed. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and hopefully it's got you excited to start your own gardening adventure at home. If you like this video, be sure to hit that like button. If you have any more questions for me on how to grow your own tomatoes at home, or any tips or tricks you'd like to share with me, be sure to leave those down in the comments, along with any other topics you'd like me to cover in future videos. If you haven't done so yet, be sure to subscribe to the channel. That way you're there for when all the new videos come out. And as always, until next time, I hope you'll join me right here on The More You Grow.